Mel, I'll have you come up at the end and hold for me if you don't mind. And just whichever one you want, we can just do one. You what? Oh, that's fun. I just had one the other day. We can probably just do the other one, but then everyone here can look at her. Cool. Thank you.
Hi, Mom, seriously, I'm trying to make a video. Can you give me 1 minute? Let's try this again. Hi, and welcome to the Spring Hill Equine Seminar. If you're new, like me, don't worry, it's gonna be fun. We'll give everyone a chance to grab some food and get comfy, and then we'll get started. Mom, I'm working here. You're always embarrassing me. Okay, I think we're about ready to go.
Hello everyone and welcome to our GOAT seminar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Spizak. I'm one of the new veterinarians with Spring Hill Equine. I'm a mixed animal veterinarian, so I do all the species, but my absolute favorite species to work on is goats. So we decided to host a little seminar for everyone today. The goal of today is going to be a little bit of GOAT 101, so we're going to go over a lot of the sort of very much GOAT basics. We are already planning a GOAT 201 seminar, so we're going to get into some more advanced topics on another date. But for today, we're going to go over some basic topics of goat care and husbandry, and we should have time for questions at the end as well. Before we get into our goats, I want to remind everyone about our open house here at Spring Hill Equine. It is going to be October 1st from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You should definitely come out, bring your family. We are going to have prizes to give away. We're going to have some performing dogs, I believe. We are going to have raffles. It's going to be a very fun time. You can learn all about horse health care. I'll have a little booth all about small animal health care, and you can ask all the doctors all the questions you want about what we do here at Spring Hill Equine. So again, October 1st, that's a Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. All right, getting into goats. As I said, GOAT 101, so basic things. Just some of our terminology. So goats are very different than other species. We've got female goats, we call those does. Bucks are intact male goats, meaning they're still intact, they're able to breed. Wethers are castrated male goats. Those are pretty popular as pets, but there's some special things we have to worry about with them that we'll talk about later. A kid is a young goat. I always say that I want kids, just not the humankind. I want the little young goats. And then we call, for the gendering of kids, we call doelings and bucklings. So goats are ruminants. For those of you guys who maybe came to Spring Hill as horse clients and have now become goat clients as well, or maybe you're new to goats, so you just want goats. Goats are very different than horses, than humans, than dogs and cats, because they have this giant fermentation vat in their belly called the rumen. People think of goats and cows, people say they have 4 stomachs. They don't actually have 1, 2, 3, 4 stomachs, but what they do have is a before stomach, as in before their main stomach, they have some other chambers. That's what the rumen is. So the reason why the rumen is so important is it is its own ecosystem. So they actually have thousands and millions of protozoa, fungi, bacteria, probably alien life forms, all kinds of creatures that live in their rumen and do their digesting for them. There is no mammal that can actually digest cellulose or lignin, is what I should say, is the hard stuff in plant material. And so horses accomplish that by hindgut fermentation. Goats and cattle accomplish that by foregut fermentation. So when they eat a food, especially their roughage food, it goes down into that rumen, and there are 3 layers to the rumen. There's a solid, a liquid, and a gas layer. And the microbes live in those different layers. Different microbes live in different spots. And they actually digest the roughage for the goat. Now, we talk about ruminants chewing their cud. That is actually something they do. So you can see the arrows in this diagram go forwards and backwards up the esophagus. That's a very important part of ruminant digestion. They will chew their bolus of food, send it down to the rumen, let it do a little bit of work, and then they'll bring a bolus of food right back up and do some more chewing. That's because the food that they eat requires quite a bit of breakdown, so it needs to be chewed multiple times. There is also another sort of side compartment to the rumen called the reticulum, and that just works to kind of squeeze food back and forth between the rumen and the reticulum. Then they move into a third compartment called the omasum. In school, we call that the book because it has lots of leaflets of tissue, and that just helps to bring out some of the moisture and water from that food. And then finally, they go into the abomasum. The abomasum is closest to your stomach and my stomach, as well as a horse's stomach. So that is kind of the true stomach that creates gastric juices and starts some of the digestive process. The remainder of the GI tract is relatively similar to other large animals, but that rumen is very important. If a rumen is not functioning, a goat is not functioning. So it is very important that we worry about the rumen. When we talk about feeding goats and sheep and cows, we're really talking about feeding the rumen and feeding the microbes. Goats get most of their protein from actual digestion of those microbes that live in their rumen. So after the microbes have done their job for a while, they die, they move into the goat's small intestine, and that's how they get digested, and that's how the goat gets protein. So this is just a very important fact to think about anytime we are dealing with goats or any ruminants, because it's just very different than any of our other species. So talking about nutrition, a lot of feed stores, a lot of online companies love to sell all kinds of goat grain and goat food and all stock food and all the great things. In a lot of situations, especially most pet goat situations, goats can be fed just with decent quality forage, whether that's browse and roughage out in a paddock or whether that's hay. Some exceptions to that are going to include pregnancy, lactation, or if we're trying to raise up kids for showing, where we're really concerned about muscle definition and everything like that. For those animals, we definitely do talk about adding in some concentrate feeds. But for your general sort of run-of-the-mill pet goat, they really don't need more than just forage. And if you have a decent paddock, that's probably all they need. Goats are naturally browsers. That means they don't want to eat off the ground. They actually want to eat leaves and shrubs around them. And so that's what they're going to want to eat in your pasture, ideally. If you are going to feed a grain, a goat-specific grain should be used. You do want to try to avoid all stock type grains. I see people use that pretty commonly, but when you try to make something work for all species, it really kind of works for none of them. Goats and sheep as well do have very specific and different mineral requirements to some of our other large animal species. And so the all-stock grains tend to be geared more towards our other large animal species, and they can make our goats and sheep very sick. This is my big PSA. I actually have a sticker. This sticker is on my coffee cup that I used today. Boy goats, especially wethers, so castrated male goats, should not eat grain as a general rule. Again, if we're talking about show animals, sometimes we make exceptions, but as a general rule, when you have a castrated male goat, you should not be feeding them any grain. We also don't like to feed them alfalfa hay specifically. They can have other types of hay. The reason for that is male goats have a long, very thin urethra, meaning the tube that their urine goes out of from their bladder to the outside of the body. That tube is long and thin, and so it is prone to obstruction, meaning something gets stuck in there and it can't pass. When we feed them grain, or sometimes when we feed them alfalfa hay or anything that has abnormal concentrations of minerals from what they are used to with their normal browse and roughage, they can create grit and stones in their bladder. As those grit and stones try to pass through the bladder, they get stuck, and then the animal can no longer urinate. A goat can die very easily, very quickly of a urinary blockage. And so the safest thing to do is to not feed boy goats grain, again, specifically wethers. Bucks are still predisposed to urethral blockage, just slightly less so than wethers. So I always tell people, be very careful with your bucks. If they are breeding animals, then I tend to try to keep them on browse and roughage for most of the year and just have them on a concentrate when they're doing their job in the breeding season. Another kind of quick PSA, because boy goats are so prone to this, anytime you do have a sick boy goat, if you feel like you have to call the vet for your boy goat, the first thing that I'm going to ask you is, have you seen it urinate? When's the last time you've seen it urinate? Because if it has not urinated recently, or you can't see it urinate, it's going to need probably to go to a hospital. Unfortunately, it's not an easy fix when they block. They generally need surgery. Question? So talking about minerals, I think that was what the question was going to be about. So we do want to generally give most goats mineral. I prefer a loose free choice mineral. I've had some people that like mineral blocks, but I feel like goats tend to get that loose free choice mineral a little bit better. And again, most importantly, a goat specific mineral should be used, not a cattle mineral, not a horse mineral for sure, and not an all-stock mineral. Little star here, this is mostly focused on goats because we have a lot more goats in Florida than sheep, but I do love sheep too. And so this is just my little star about sheep. Sheep are way more sensitive than goats to copper toxicity, although goats are still sensitive. So if you do happen to have sheep, definitely a sheep-specific mineral, a sheep-specific food. I have seen way too many sheep die of copper toxicity. Don't like to see it. So, but for goats, goat-specific mineral. I put one example up here. I am not paid by Purina. I just happen to like their goat products, so they make a decent goat mineral. I like to offer it free choice as long as we're not having any types of mineral deficiency issues. Generally, goats are pretty smart. Put it out in a tub for them. They'll take what they need. If you're unsure about your minerals, you're having mineral deficiency issues, you're unsure what concentrations you should be using, consider a pasture or a hay analysis. The UF-IFAS Extension Office will do that for you. It's pretty easy to set up, and that can help tell you about what your pasture has, what hay you're feeding has, and give us an idea of what to change in the diet. Question? Do they need a salt block is the question. So we can, a lot of the free choice minerals do have salt added. I would not feed them a separate salt block, reason being, if you give me salty potato chips and you give me broccoli, I'm gonna eat the salty potato chips all day and I'm gonna leave the broccoli alone. And so if we mix the salt in with the mineral, I'm totally okay with that. A lot of times they don't need that, but if we give them a salt block separate from mineral, then they're gonna focus on the salt block and not eat the mineral. Oh, more questions. That's okay.
Do you feel like there's certain breeds that are more prone to the blockage, or like if you are a boy, you're prone?
The question is, are there breeds that are more prone to a blockage, or is it if you're a boy, you're prone? In my experience, I haven't found particular breeds to be more prone to blockage. I will say we believe that age at castration does have an effect. So if a goat is destined to be a pet goat, I tend to try to wait until they're 6 or 7 months of age to castrate them. That is with the caveat that we keep them away from females that could be impregnated, because they can, in fact, impregnate females starting at about 3 months of age. So as long as they're going to stay away from the ladies between 3 and 6 months of age, then I would rather wait. For a lot of sort of production dairy type animals, if we're going to castrate, we tend to castrate earlier, and so those ones are going to be more predisposed. Is that good? Oh, question here. So the question is, could goat treats also cause blockages in the males? If they are goat specific, it's less likely to. So if you're buying something that's made for goats, we want to keep sort of treats as a lower part of the diet. We want roughage, hays, browses to be the biggest part of their diet. Occasional treats are okay. I love giving goats animal crackers. They love them. For anyone that doesn't know that, goats absolutely love animal crackers. Yes. So treats are okay. I do try to avoid feeding too many horse treats to goats. It's okay in small quantities, but again, anything for horses is going to have a higher copper level generally than anything for goats. Good? Okay. All right, so this slide is called What's Wrong with My Goat? And I've answered it 3 times. Parasites, parasites, parasites. especially in the Southeast. I don't know if we have anyone tuning in from outside the Southeast, but especially in the Southeast US, parasites are the #1 problem that I see in goats. And honestly, anywhere in the US, and probably anywhere in the world, parasites are a big deal in goats. Goats and sheep are evolved to live on the side of mountains. I'm sure we've all seen the fun videos of goats rock climbing. Parasites don't live great on the side of mountains. There's not a lot of soil for them to live in, so goats never learned to avoid parasites in their guts. And then we brought them to Florida, where there is hot, humid weather all of the time, plenty of soil, plenty of lovely resorts for the parasites to live in the soil. And so goats have no idea what to do with that. So we have a huge parasite issue in goats. There are a variety of intestinal parasites that infect ruminants, both goats and cattle. The big issue in goats is the barber pole worm. The scientific name is Haemonchus contortus. This super gross picture in the middle is a necropsy picture of the inside of an abomasum, so that true stomach of goats. And you can see lots of little squiggly bits, and those are the worms. We will find hundreds and thousands of those in goat stomachs. They are very tiny. The picture on the right is a close-up of a female barber pole worm. They're called barber pole worms because if you guys remember the red and white striped poles that would be outside of barbershops, and in the female worm, that is actually her GI tract and her reproductive tract that are twisted together inside of her, and that's what makes that pattern, and that's where they get their name from. So as I said, they live in that last stomach chamber, that abomasum. They suck blood, so they make goats anemic. That's what makes them sick. And the larvae, which is super fun and annoying, can actually go into a hypobiotic state, meaning that they can just go dormant inside the goat if conditions are unfavorable outside. I have no idea how they have antenna to the outside world from inside the goat, but they know if conditions are favorable or unfavorable. So they can actually go into a hypobiotic state in the animal and not reproduce until environmental conditions are more favorable for them. And then they can turn up that cycle and start reproducing like crazy. Around the times of kidding, female goats tend to release larvae out of that hypobiotic state, and it's called a periparturient rise. And so around the time of kidding, they have a rise in the number of their parasites. So some clinical signs of parasites. Anemia is our big one. That's low numbers of red blood cells. Red blood cells are our oxygen-carrying cells in our body, and so they bring oxygen and nutrition to all of the tissues of the body. And so when the parasites suck those away, they can't get oxygen and nutrition to all of their tissues. Lots of things go wrong. Edema is another one. Part of that is because they have less protein in their blood, so less things to hold the fluid in their blood vessels. So the fluid leaks out into the skin and the tissues. This goat on the right is demonstrating that. This is commonly known as bottle jaw. Many of you will have probably heard that term, and that means just edema under the chin. That is a classic sign of parasites in goats. General lethargy, weight loss we can see, a rough hair coat, and less commonly diarrhea, but diarrhea is a potential clinical sign of parasites in these guys. So the big topic, question first.
Can the worms be transmitted from parents?
So the question is, can the worms be transmitted from parent to kid? Not like in the uterus, in the placenta, but the mom, because she has that periparturient rise, she will defecate all of those parasites out, and goat kids, I'm sure we all know, put their mouths on everything, and they will be inoculated with those parasites pretty much from birth. And so that's part of why it's very important to manage our parasites in our pregnant and lactating animals, and to kid on dry pastures where we don't have a lot of other goats besides our moms and our babies. Good? Yeah, yes. More to come in future talks, Easter eggs. So this is just a fun fact because I always say FOMACHA and people say, what is that? So the FOMACHA card is something I'm going to talk about. I have a video on it that we use to measure the anemia levels of our goats. The reason it's called FOMACHA is not because it stands for anything. It's not an acronym. It was created by a veterinarian in South Africa, and his name is Fafa Malan. And so he said, FOMACHA, Fafa Malan chart. I just think it's funny. That's him. And so this picture is showing the FOMACHA card being held up against a goat where someone is doing a FOMACHA score. And so what this is there is a specific bed of mucous membranes on the inner lower eyelid of goats, and that is our objective measure of the anemia level of the goats. This is how we determine parasite burden. So we talked about the clinical signs of parasites. We know that they can be anemic. This is how we look at that. We know they can have bottle jaw. We know they can have rough hair coats and weight loss and things like that. But the truth of the matter is all goats have parasites all of the time. We're never going to get them to zero, ever, ever, and that should not be our goal. So what we need to do is assess their parasite burden and assess how they are handling their parasite load. And our goal should be to both raise and produce goats that handle their parasites well. So part of the way we do this is by checking a Fromage Score on our goats. I recommend monthly at an absolute minimum. I much prefer it more than that. I know some of our milkers check Fromage Scores regularly when their goats are on the milking stand. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. We have a video coming up, and we actually have some demo goats here today that we will show at the end of the talk, live and in person, how to do a Fromage Score on a goat. But basically, you're going to look at that specific bed of mucous membranes. Now, if you have a lot of goats, or if you just want to be super scientific about it, getting the card is for sure the way to go. I have my very own Fromage card right here. But what is most important for your own individual animals is that you know what their levels are on a regular basis. And so you know that they were more pale last week and they're brighter pink this week, and that's a good thing. Or you know that they were nice and dark red a month ago when you checked it, and now they're kind of pale and kind of really light pink. That's concerning. That's a reason to call your vet. So the change is very important over time. And I always recommend sort of recording in some type of book or documentation what your goat's Fromage Score is. Now, I say score because we do put numbers to it. So we have it, there's our card close up. We have a 1 to 5 score. So a 1 is actually nice, deep, dark red. And then a 5 is anything from sort of that yellowish white there to the white of the card. I have seen a few animals that were the white of that card. Spoiler alert, most of them do not make it. Everyone always likes to say that they have a high Fromage Score, so that's good. It is actually backwards. So 1 is good, 5 is bad. So just for clarification there. If I'm not your vet, if you have a different goat vet, definitely talk to them about protocols, but this is my general protocol for most goats. If we do a Fromage Score and they are a 1 or a 2, so they are nice deep dark red or kind of a dark salmon orange, don't deworm them. Don't mess with them. Turn them back out. Let them do their life. If they're a 5, please call me. It's not good. It's not going to go well. If they're a 3 or 4, that's the middle ground. That's when you want to have a protocol with your veterinarian. Generally, I'm going to tell you I want you to collect a fecal sample, and I want to run it, and I want to see what our eggs per gram is. In goats, again, we don't just look and see are there parasites there in the fecal, because there are. I promise there are. We look at how many there are, and specifically it's eggs per gram of feces. So it's a number that we calculate. We do our fecal test, and then we use some calculations and make that number happen. And we have cutoffs for when we're going to deworm. Now, different farms might have different cutoffs depending on your situation. That's why I say you have to set this protocol with your veterinarian. So again, this is our card, but what is most important is that you kind of know your goat's general numbers and know that if they're changing. And I think, yep, this is our video. So this is demonstrating how to do a Fromage Score. So there's 4 steps to doing a Fromage Score. You are going to use your top hand to cover the goat's eye with your thumb. I'm going to play it again here. So cover, and then you're going to push. So you're actually going to push the eye a little bit into their head. You are not going to hurt them, I promise. There's room for the eye to go backwards. Then you are going to pull with your lower thumb their lower eyelid down, and then the mucous membranes will pop into view. So cover, push, pull, pop. And that's the way that we do it. Again, if you're wanting to be very objective, you will have the card up against the goat's eye and use that card to do your score. Do this one more time, and then we'll also show it live and in person. So cover, push, pull, and pop right into view. That goat was a 3. I don't know if you can tell from the video, but right in the middle of that score. Another thing that we're going to assess in goats, this can sometimes help us decide what we need to do with 3s and 4s, is a body condition score. Now, the main point about body condition score that I want to make to everybody is that it is not just a visual score. With a lot of animals, with dogs and cats, sometimes with horses, we can kind of look at them and score them. And most of those animals we score on a 1 to 9. In goats, sheep, and cattle, we score them on a 1 to 5, and it is a palpating score. So we are actually going to put our hands on the animal. This is something that is somewhat hard to explain verbally, so I am going to demo it on our demo goats at the end of the talk. But we are actually going to put our hands on the lumbar spine just in front of their hips, and we're going to feel their dorsal spinous processes right at the top of the spine, and then we're going to feel their transverse spinous processes, and those are on their sides, kind of just above their where their rumen is. We want to feel the covering on those bones, and basically how much covering there is and how smooth that surface is going to tell us their score, as well as between the spinous process and the transverse process. In a perfect animal, we'd like that to be a nice sort of smooth, slightly curved line of muscle and fat there. So a 3 out of 5 is ideal. I will say in breeding animals, we generally want them to be a little bit higher at the start of breeding season. For bucks, I actually like them to start at a 4 because on average, bucks are going to lose a full body condition score throughout breeding season because they work real hard. For does, 3.5 or so is generally pretty good. So again, this is something that is a good thing to practice with your goats at home. Put your hands right on that lumbar spine and feel the top, feel the sides, and just get a really good idea of what each individual animal is. I say it's not only visual because, again, goats have a rumen, like we talked about at the beginning, and that rumen fills up and shrinks down throughout the day. So plenty of goats look real fat right after a meal and then real skinny later on when they're working on digesting things. So actually putting your hands on them is the way to go. And so if we have an animal that's a 3 or a 4 Fromage Score and they're not a very good body condition score, where we're worried about how they're going to handle losing more blood, losing more nutrition from parasites, then that may be some that we would deworm at potentially a slightly lower threshold value than a goat that has a great body condition score, but still a Fromage of a 3 or a 4. And so just a really good thing to practice with your animals. And I didn't say with Fromage Score as well, doing it once a month, doing it every couple of weeks, and then making it a positive thing. Goats are really smart animals, and so giving them giving them a treat of some sort, giving them a little hay cube or something like that, or just scratches, whatever they like, animal crackers, after you do Fromage Scores will make it a positive experience for them. All right, so hoof trimming. This is going to be really brief. This is something that I recommend you have your vet teach you if you're not already familiar with it. I have a little tiny demo here of me kind of doing a partial hoof trim. But in general, hoof trimming should be done about 2 to 4 times per year on the average goat. I always recommend providing an abrasive surface for them to walk around on or to climb on. Young goats especially love to climb on boulders and stumps and whatever you'll give them. And doing all of that natural movement, like I said, goats were meant to climb mountains. So doing all of that natural movement wears their hooves down in the proper way. You can kind of see in the still here the anatomy of the hoof, and so the central part is their sole, and then the edges where you saw my hoof trimmers go, that is their hoof wall. This goat is actually pretty well trimmed. I was just taking a teensy bit off, mostly for the video, but you want to make sure that the wall doesn't curve down on top of the sole, because that is going to prevent it from wearing correctly. You can also sometimes take a little bit of the tip of the toe off, because the wall grows together at that point, and it can create kind of a weird point to it. And so that will also change the way that they wear their feet. Once we change the way they wear their feet, then it's going to be harder and harder to get it back to normal. So doing this as a preventive maintenance is going to be much easier, much better than trying to let them grow all the way out and then fix things later. Having improperly trimmed or overgrown hooves can very quickly lead to arthritis. It can lead to foot rot. Goats can get laminitis as well. So can lead to some bad things. So definitely recommend regular hoof trimming. If you're uncomfortable with it, like I said, have your veterinarian out, have them teach you how to do it. Or if you're really uncomfortable with it, just have your veterinarian out regularly to do it. I'm always happy to trim feet, but I know that you guys can do it just as well as I can, so I'm happy to teach you as well. These are goat hoof trimmers that we bought off Amazon, I believe. The specific tool, the specific goat trimmer you use is less important than that they are sharp. So keeping them well maintained, well lubricated is going to make things things a lot easier for you. This goat was in a milking stanchion, which makes it very easy. But otherwise, it's generally a 2-person job. I'll show a little bit of sort of general goat restraint with our demos later. But what I typically like to do is hold behind the back of the head and then under the chin. And once you have control of their head, you generally have majority control of the goat. If you need to, you can use a wall or a fence as kind of a barrier to keep them in one spot. Oops. There we go. And now vaccines. So goats should be vaccinated at least yearly, depending on the situation, sometimes twice a year. The main vaccine that we do for goats is a CDT vaccine, is the acronym. That stands for Clostridium perfringens type C and D, and those are specifically toxins type C and D, and tetanus toxoid. And so it's a 3-part vaccine that we give. You give it subcutaneously. Our little diagram here shows 3 spots on a goat that you can give it subcutaneously. In the neck is generally my preferred area. My second option is in the sort of armpit region behind the front leg there. And then in the sort of chest pec area is the next best region. The CDT vaccine is very important. Tetanus, goats are actually quite susceptible to tetanus. I've had a couple goat tetanus patients, so we definitely want to protect them from that every single year. Type C and D Clostridium is a little bit more common in young animals, but any animal can get it. And partially because of that, pregnant does we want to vaccinate in the last few weeks prior to gestation, or prior to kidding, last few weeks of gestation, because that is when they're making their colostrum, which is that first milk that kids get, and gives the kids a little bit of immunity before they build their own immune system. And then kids, we want to do multiple boosters while they're young, and sort of exactly when we do that is going to depend a little bit on your farm and what you've done with your does. But we want to do multiple boosters while they're young, and then it turns into a yearly vaccine when they're older. I say plus minus rabies vaccine on here. The rabies vaccine is technically off-label in goats. Didn't really get into this in this talk, but goats are considered food-producing animals in the United States, and so we have pretty strict laws that govern what we can do medically with them. So it's generally frowned upon to do things off-label in goats. They are considered a minor species, so we have a little bit more leeway than we do with, for example, cattle. That being said, I do recommend rabies vaccines in goats that are going to be around humans a lot, that are not part of their family. So goats in petting zoos, things like that, or goats that are, I don't know, just around a lot of children, or potentially at a higher risk of exposure. Pack goats I'd probably recommend it for as well. Goats that are going to be either around wild animals a lot or around humans that they don't know a lot. It's unlikely that a goat's going to bite you, but it can happen, and goats are mammals, so they can get rabies. So again, this is something to talk to your vet about. Figure out if a rabies vaccine for your goat is the right option. Really briefly on breeding and reproduction. This is also a little preview of Goat 201, because I'm not getting big into reproduction here. But anytime we are breeding any animals, our goal should be to build a better version of that animal. So we want to build a better goat. So I've got sort of brief charts here of what is a good breeding candidate and what is not a good breeding candidate. We do not have to breed all of our goats. In fact, we probably should not breed all of our goats. So good breeding candidates are going to be consistently a Fromage Score 1 or 2. Again, that means dark red to pink to kind of that deep orange salmon. That means that they handle parasites really, really well. They are consistently that. That means they're not getting dewormed a lot. That means they're not going to give dewormer-resistant parasites to their kids. So really good, really important. That's why it's top on the list. You want to breed animals that are handle parasite loads very well. Consistently, an ideal body condition score is also great. We don't want them to be fluctuating. Tested for infectious diseases. This is also something that I very much did not have time to get into in my half-hour talk today, but there are a variety of infectious diseases in goats that we worry about. We want to test for them prior to breeding our animals. We want them to be unrelated to each other generally. There is some line breeding in sort of the show goat world, but as a general rule, we should try to not have any direct relations breeding with each other. And then of course, good conformation. Just like any animal, we want to build a better version of that animal. So if you have an animal with a conformational defect, they're no longer a breeding candidate. So the opposite on the other side, do not breed. Animals that you're deworming all the time, you should not breed them. And honestly, that is If you've dewormed an animal a bunch and then you just learned about Fromage Score and you realize maybe you shouldn't have dewormed them a bunch, I would still hesitate on breeding that animal because you've potentially started to perpetuate resistance in that animal, and I would worry about it giving resistant parasites to its kids. A fluctuating body condition score. This can be for a lot of reasons. It can be for parasites, it can be for other reasons, but whatever it is, I worry about it being heritable down the line. This is again a preview of some of those infectious diseases, but if they are CAE, which is caprine arthritis encephalitis virus, or Johne's, if they're a carrier of either of those diseases, they are automatically not breeding candidates. Again, siblings and parents shouldn't be bred together. Cryptorchid, what that means is that one or both of the testicles of a male animal has not descended into the scrotum. That is a very heritable disease that should not be bred. If you have a cryptorchid buck, it should be castrated and not bred. And it needs to be both need to be castrated. So if it has one still up there and one dropped down, ideally the one that is in the abdomen or the inguinal region should be removed. Polled goats, this one not everybody knows. So polled means that they don't have horns naturally. They're born without horns. In goats specifically, not in cattle, but in goats, polled animals are actually connected with hermaphrodism, meaning an animal that has both male and female reproductive organs. And so if you do have a polled animal, it is at risk of creating an offspring that is a hermaphrodite and is not a good breeding candidate. And then I put lameness on there. That's sort of related to our good conformation. Basically, animals that are lame probably have something musculoskeletally wrong with them. If that's something that's acute and easy to treat, then maybe they're a breeding candidate. But oftentimes it's something with their bony structure that is already abnormal, and it's just something that is better to not be propagated. So these are, again, very basic, very general things. There are lots of other reasons both to breed and to not breed animals, but I wanted to just throw this up there because we're in the middle of / getting into our breeding seasons, and so just to have you guys think about. All right, so that is the majority of my talk. I wanted to put a little plug up here with Spring Hill Equine. I do something called a herd evaluation. I do that for any ruminant species, so goats, sheep, or cattle. It is a $200 cost plus a trip fee to come out to your farm. What I do is I send you a fairly in-depth questionnaire ahead of time that you fill out, and you give me lots of information about your farm, the history of your animals, where you've purchased them from, what your goals are for your farm. That's a really big thing, any health issues you've had. I come out, I spend a little bit of time on your property, I talk to you a bunch. I tend to walk all of your fields, walk all of your property, look at your barn, look at where you feed, where you milk, if you milk your animals, and take a sort of global look at the entire herd. I don't generally do any individual animal care at that visit. It's meant to be a global herd eval, but it's a fact-finding mission. I try to find out exactly what you're doing, what your goals are. And then I take a few days and I write a pretty long report. I'm not a very concise typist, so it tends to be a good couple of pages. And I give you my thoughts on what you're doing with your farm, and I tend to pick kind of a top 2 priorities of what we can work on with your farm. And that's going to be individualized to you, your animals, and your situation, as well as your goals. And so we work on that, and then that opens a line of communication for us. It's not like I give the report and we're done. We can continue to have that conversation. What that also does is gives me a VCPR with your herd. For those that aren't familiar, a VCPR is a veterinary client-patient relationship. It is required by law to have a VCPR in order to dispense medications. And so in order to establish a VCPR, I have to have examined your herd, seen your property, seen your animals, and your setup. So that gives me that VCPR so that we can work together in the future to help out your herd. So that is what I can offer. I would absolutely love to see all of your goats. I will now bring up our little demo goat. I'll have my friend and assistant come bring her goat up and we'll do a little bit of demoing. So what we're gonna talk about is both a body condition score, a Fromage score, and then just a little bit on general goat handling. Does anybody have any questions in the audience while we're waiting?
I have a question about ticks.
Uh-huh.
Ticks on goats. Is that something that we should worry about, and how do we manage that?
Yeah, so the question is about ticks on goats. So, it is something that we should worry about. I would manage it with something topical. There's a couple of different options for that. I find Ultra Boss tends to work decently well. That's a pour-on product. There's another product called 7 Dust that I've had some decent results with any type of sort of topical parasite. So, and checking them for ticks regularly is a good option. All right, here is our little demo guy. Are they okay right here, Justin? Okay. All right. So to hold a goat, well, Mel's doing a great job here, but especially for a bigger goat, holding them behind the back of the head and under their chin, you can have decent control. You can see this guy doesn't exactly want to be held, but I can generally control him with his head. For body condition score, this is again the thing that we have to demo kind of in person, thanks. So this lumbar region right here, right in front of their hips, right on the lower back is where we're gonna feel for our body condition score. This is exactly what I do. I put a hand right here. He says, no, I don't wanna be a movie star. We put a hand right here on their lumbar spine, and I use my fingers on one side and my thumbs on the other side to feel their transverse processes. And I generally just use the palm of my hand to feel their spinous processes. I want to feel for the covering over that spine. All right, I'll do a Fromage real quick, and so he can go back to his friend. So again, Fromage Score, 4 steps. Cover, push, pull, pop. We're gonna cover that eye. We're gonna push it in. We're gonna pull out his lower eyelid, and look at that beautiful Fromage Score. That is a really good color. That is what we want to see. Great job, Mel. So that is something you should check on your goats at least once a month, more ideally every 2 weeks or every week. And like I said, give them a treat, make it a happy experience, and then let them go back to their friends. Thank you. Oh, you're okay. He says, no, I don't want to. There we go. Okay, I think I will open it up to more questions. I don't know if we have anything online or if we want to be done. Okay, yes. So for boys, so the question is about alfalfa and whether or not we should feed alfalfa. Alfalfa is a little bit high in calcium, and so it's a calcium to phosphorus ratio that can be a risk for boy goats. It is less risky than feeding a concentrate grain if that's all they'll eat, or if you mix it in with sort of normal hay. I've had a lot of boy goats on it that do okay. It is just a riskier hay. Yep. Yeah, so the question is alfalfa pellets as a treat okay? I think in moderation it's probably fine. I would just say, especially if you have a boy goat that does unfortunately block, he no longer gets alfalfa pellets. We kind of take those away from him. And female goats can kind of have whatever they want, but the boys are the issue. It is possible for female goats to block. It is just very, very, very rare. Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, I think we're done with our goat seminar. Thank you guys all for coming in person. Thank you to our demo goat, and thank you to Mel for bringing our demo goat. Thank you to everybody online for watching. Don't forget to come to our open house Saturday, October 1st from 10 to 2, and stick around on Spring Hill Equine's social media channels. We are going to have some goat-specific videos going up on our YouTube here shortly that I filmed fairly recently, so they're going to go out pretty soon. And then check out Tuesdays with Tony blog. He writes all the time. He's been writing about horses, but he is slowly starting to learn about goats and dogs and cats, so we're getting some other topics up there. So that is all for tonight. Thank you guys all for joining in.